Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into a case that's been really fascinating true crime fans for decades now. The White House farm murders.
Huh?
The one that's left everyone asking, is this case closed? Well, you've sent us some really interesting material, and we're ready to get into it.
It's one of those cases that just seems like ripped from the headlines,
Hmm.
A picture-perfect family, but underneath it all, a really dark secret.
Okay, so let's set the scene. It's August 1985. We're in the quiet English countryside at White House Farm, the home of the Bamber family. Neville and June, their adopted children. Sheila and Jeremy and Sheila's 6-year-old twin sons, Nicholas and Daniel.
It seems so peaceful, right? But like we said, things aren't always as they appear.
And that calm is shattered when the police get a frantic phone call from Jeremy Bamber. He claims his sister Sheila has gone crazy with a gun.
A chilling call that sets off a chain of events that changes everyone's lives forever.
Police race to the scene thinking it's a hostage situation. But what they find is a bloodbath. 5 members of the family are dead.
Neville and June are found downstairs brutally murdered. Upstairs, the twins Nicholas and Daniel are found dead in their beds. And then there's Sheila lying in her room with a rifle in her hand.
It's a horrific scene. And the initial theory is Sheila, struggling with mental illness, snapped, killed her family, and then took her own life. Open and shut case, right?
Well, the police certainly thought so at first. Sheila had a history of mental health issues, including a diagnosis of schizophrenia, and her relationship with her mother, June, was known to be strained. It seemed to fit the narrative.
But as the investigation progresses, doubts start to surface. Like during the funeral preparations, Jeremy's cousin makes a startling discovery. A silencer is hidden away with a trace of blood on it.
And get this, the blood is tested, and it turns out to be Sheila's. This throws a major wrench in the investigation.
Hold on, if Sheila was the shooter and died by suicide in her bedroom, how could her blood be on a silencer found downstairs?
Exactly, it just doesn't add up. And there's more.
Wait, there's more. This is already crazy.
Oh yeah, when the police take a closer look at the crime scene photos, they notice something peculiar about Sheila's body. Despite the bloodbath throughout the house, her feet are completely clean. It's as if she never moved from the spot where she was shot.
Okay, this is where things start to get really interesting. It's like pieces of the puzzle just aren't fitting together.
Right, and as the inconsistencies pile up, whispers start circulating about Jeremy, the sole survivor of the massacre.
You know, the one who stands to inherit a sizable fortune.
Precisely. People begin to recall his behavior after the murders, an almost unsettling cheerfulness at the funeral playing up his grief for the media, and even casual comments about running things now.
It's giving off some serious suspicious vibes. This isn't just about a troubled young woman snapping anymore.
No, the focus is shifting, and Jeremy's becoming a person of interest.
And then comes the bombshell.
Mhm.
Jeremy's girlfriend, Julie Mugford, contacts the police with some disturbing information.
She reveals that Jeremy had joked about getting rid of his family to inherit their wealth, and on the day of the murders, he even uttered the chilling phrase, "It's tonight or never."
Wait, are you serious? He actually said that. That's beyond creepy.
It certainly adds a sinister layer to the story. And Julie doesn't stop there. She also tells the police that Jeremy knew about a specific window at White House Farm that didn't lock properly. The same window the killer seemingly used to enter the house.
So now the police have a possible motive, a potential opportunity, and a witness who claims Jeremy was thinking about harming his family. Seems like they finally have enough to go on.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But despite Julie's revelations, the police initially lack the concrete evidence needed to formally charge Jeremy, so he's released.
And what does Jeremy do? He jets off to Saint-Tropez. The nerve of this guy.
While Jeremy's enjoying the French Riviera, the police are back in England digging deeper into his past. What they uncover is a history of troubling behavior, petty crimes, and a growing obsession with money.
Okay, this is starting to sound less like a tragic accident and more like a calculated plan.
The pieces of the puzzle are definitely starting to shift.
So Jeremy's little French vacation doesn't last long. Upon his return to England, he's arrested and charged with the 5 murders. It's time for the trial, and the world is watching to see if justice will be served. But as we'll discover, the truth is far more complicated than anyone could have imagined.
And that's where we'll pick up next time. Welcome back to the deep dive. Last time we left off with Jeremy Bamber's arrest. The trial that followed was a complete media sensation, captivating the nation, and everyone wanted to know, was he a cold-blooded killer? Or was this all just a tragic misunderstanding?
Yeah, it's like something out of a movie, right? This seemingly charming young man accused of brutally murdering his entire family.
The prosecution definitely painted a picture of a callous and calculated killer. motivated by greed and a thirst for his family's fortune.
So they presented Jeremy as this manipulative individual who had grown tired of his family and saw them as obstacles to his wealth and freedom.
Right, and a key piece of evidence in their case was that silencer we talked about earlier. Remember, it was found hidden away, not on the rifle, and it had both Sheila's and Jeremy's fingerprints on it.
Right, and the prosecution argued that this was proof Jeremy had handled the silencer on the night of the murders, placing him directly at the scene of the crime.
They also highlighted the presence of red paint on the murder weapon. The paint matched a scratched shelf near that unlocked window, suggesting the gun had been brought in from outside.
Which wouldn't make sense if Sheila was already inside the house and had a breakdown, right?
Exactly. It suggests a planned entry, someone bringing the weapon into the house with the intention of committing murder.
And then there were those inconsistencies in Jeremy's alibi. He claimed he was at home when the murders took place, but there was no one to back up his story.
And his explanation for not immediately calling emergency services after finding his family dead was unconvincing, to say the least. He claimed he couldn't remember the number, which, in the heat of the moment, seems a little far-fetched, don't you think?
It does, yeah. It's like he was trying to create a more dramatic story, buy himself some time.
The prosecution also brought in a police officer who testified that he saw Jeremy driving suspiciously slowly towards White House Farm on the night of the murders. This completely contradicted Jeremy's claims of being frantic with worry about his family.
So it sounds like the prosecution was building a pretty strong case against him, weaving together this narrative of premeditation and cold-bloodedness.
They certainly were, but the defense presented a very different picture of events. Their argument rested on the idea that Sheila, driven by her mental illness, was the sole perpetrator.
They highlighted her schizophrenia diagnosis and her turbulent relationship with her mother, June.
They argued that Sheila's fragile mental state could have led to a psychotic break, culminating in that violent outburst that claimed the lives of her family.
Right. They emphasized the difficulty of staging a suicide with the specific injuries Sheila sustained. Shooting oneself twice under the chin with a rifle, especially while lying down, would be extremely challenging even for someone determined to take their own life.
Absolutely. And the defense suggested that Sheila first killed Neville downstairs, then went upstairs and killed everyone else before taking her own life in her bedroom. They argued that Jeremy wouldn't have been able to stage such a complex and physically demanding suicide scene.
But if that was the case, wouldn't there be signs of a struggle between Sheila and Neville?
Well, the prosecution countered this argument by suggesting that Jeremy could have forced Sheila to lie down and then shot her at close range, making it appear like a suicide.
So both sides were using the same evidence to support their opposing narratives.
Yeah.
It's like two sides of the same coin, each telling a completely different story.
And that's what makes this case so fascinating. There's enough ambiguity to fuel endless debate. It all comes down to who you believe, the seemingly grieving son or the mounting evidence that suggests something far more sinister.
It's a tough call, isn't it? You have this seemingly straightforward narrative of a mentally unstable daughter snapping. But then you have these nagging inconsistencies, the whispers about Jeremy and his behavior that seems almost too eager, too calculated.
It's a classic true crime dilemma. Who do you trust? Who do you believe?
It's just mind-blowing how both the prosecution and the defense used the same pieces of evidence to tell completely different stories.
It really is. That's the nature of circumstantial evidence, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
all open to interpretation, and in this case, those interpretations were miles apart.
So let's revisit some of that key evidence, starting with that infamous silencer. It really does feel like the linchpin of the whole case.
Absolutely. It's the piece of evidence that poked the biggest hole in that initial murder-suicide theory. If Sheila killed herself in her bedroom, how did the silencer end up hidden away downstairs with traces of her blood?
Right. The defense tried to argue that it was Jeremy's silencer and that Sheila must have used it during her rampage. But if that's the case, why wasn't it found on the rifle next to her body? Why was it stashed away as if someone was trying to hide it?
And the fact that it had both Sheila and Jeremy's fingerprints on it further complicates matters. The prosecution saw this as clear evidence that Jeremy had handled the silencer on the night of the murders.
And then there's the mystery of Sheila's clean feet. In a house covered in blood, how do her feet stay pristine if she was the one running around shooting everyone? It's a detail that just doesn't sit right.
It's a very powerful visual that casts doubt on the image of a frenzied attacker. The prosecution argued that it suggested Sheila was killed where she was found and never moved, making her a victim rather than the perpetrator.
The defense tried to explain it away by suggesting that maybe she took off her shoes or socks, but it felt a bit weak, like they were grasping at straws.
And let's not forget Jeremy's behavior after the murders. That's something that's always intrigued me.
Yeah, the grinning at the funeral, playing up his grief for the cameras,
Yeah.
making those comments about running things now. It all just felt so off, so calculated.
Like he couldn't maintain the facade of grief, couldn't hide his true nature even in the face of such a tragedy.
It almost seemed like he was enjoying the attention, relishing in his newfound position as the sole heir to the family fortune.
The prosecution certainly used this behavior to portray Jeremy as a cold and heartless individual, someone who lacked empathy and was solely motivated by greed.
The defense countered by saying that grief can manifest in strange ways, and that we shouldn't judge someone's reaction to such a horrific event. They argued that Jeremy's behavior could have been a coping mechanism, a way of dealing with the unimaginable trauma he had experienced.
It's a fair point, but there's just something about Jeremy's actions that feels inherently unsettling.
And then there's Julie Mugford's testimony. Her claims about Jeremy joking about killing his family and that chilling phrase, "it's tonight or never," are hard to dismiss.
Right, and while the defense attempted to discredit her, portraying her as a scorned lover seeking revenge, her knowledge of that unlocked window, the one used by the killer, it just adds a layer of credibility to her story.
Yeah, it's like all these seemingly disparate pieces of evidence, even the small details, they start to come together to paint a picture, and that picture points towards Jeremy.
In the end, the jury found Jeremy Bamber guilty of the murders of his family. He was sentenced to 5 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole. The judge even went so far as to call him evil beyond belief.
But even with a guilty verdict in Jeremy, behind bars, the White House farm murders remain one of Britain's most controversial cases. There are still people out there who believe Jeremy is innocent, that Sheila was the true killer.
And that's what makes this case so captivating, so enduring. It challenges us to grapple with the complexities of mental illness, the nature of truth, and the limits of our understanding. It forces us to ask, is the case truly closed, or are there still unanswered questions lurking in the shadows of White House Farm?
It's a question that will likely continue to be debated for years to come. This case has it all: family drama, greed, mental illness, and a brutal crime that shocked the nation.
It's a stark reminder that behind that facade of normalcy, darkness can lurk. And sometimes the people closest to us are capable of the most unthinkable acts.
So after this deep dive into the evidence, the theories, and the conflicting accounts, it's really up to you to decide what you believe. Was Jeremy Bamber a cold-blooded killer who orchestrated the deaths of his family for financial gain? Or was he a victim of circumstance, wrongly accused and convicted of a crime he didn't commit?
The truth, as always, is elusive. What we're left with are the pieces of a puzzle, some fitting neatly, others stubbornly refusing to align. It's a puzzle that may never be fully solved.
Stay curious, stay safe, and keep those brain cells firing.